She was sitting on the cold pavement, her hands trembling, tears cutting lines through the dirt on her face. People passed her like she didn't exist except one man, a billionaire in a spotless white suit. He stopped, looked right at her, and walked away. "Please, just help me," she whispered, her voice breaking. He didn't even turn back. To him, she was just another beggar. But what he didn't know, what would soon destroy him, was that the woman he ignored wasn't a stranger at all. She was his mother. But how could that be? Before the world called him a billionaire, Ethan Grant was just a boy who grew up in the quiet suburbs of Atlanta. His childhood was polished on the outside, private schools, manicured lawns, picture-perfect family photos, but behind those smiles hid a truth he never understood. His father was white, powerful, and distant. His mother, well, he'd been told she died when he was a baby. He never saw a photo, never heard her voice, just whispers that she'd left. Now at 38, Ethan had built an empire that made headlines. Glass towers with his name on them. Charity galas that painted him as the man who cares. Yet in the silence of his penthouse, he often found himself staring out at the city lights, wondering why care always felt so hollow. "Sir, the cameras are ready," his assistant said one morning as they prepared for another public event, one meant to show how much he gave back to the community. He nodded, fixing his cufflinks, unaware that his life was about to collide with a truth he'd spent decades protected from. Outside the event hall, a small crowd had gathered, protesters, beggars, and voices asking for help. Among them, a black woman sat by the curb, her clothes torn, her eyes weary yet alive with something raw. She watched Ethan step out of his car, surrounded by security, her lips parting in disbelief. "Ethan?" she whispered. He didn't hear her, didn't even glance her way. But fate had already turned its wheel. The woman he ignored wasn't there by accident. And soon, the walls he'd built around his past were about to crack wide open. The day after the gala, Ethan's PR team flooded the internet with photos, him shaking hands, smiling for cameras, changing lives. But none of them showed the moment that really mattered, the black woman sitting on the curb outside, whispering his name through her tears. That image never made the headlines, but someone had filmed it. A week later, the clip went viral, an exhausted woman crying, reaching out as a billionaire walked past without a glance. The caption read, "The man who says he cares." At first, Ethan brushed it off. "It's just online noise," he told his assistant, tightening his tie. "They'll move on." But they didn't. Protesters gathered outside his offices. News outlets questioned his authenticity. And that same woman, the one he'd ignored, was suddenly everywhere. Reporters said she called herself Ruth Grant. Grant. He froze when he read the name. "Coincidence," he muttered, scrolling through the article. But the photo, those eyes, something about them clawed at his memory. 2 days later, Ruth was standing outside his charity foundation, her voice trembling as she spoke into a reporter's microphone. "I'm not here for money," she said softly. "I'm here for my son." The crowd went silent. Ethan's name trended for all the wrong reasons. His board demanded answers. His father, retired now, still as cold as ever, called him. "Don't entertain this nonsense," his father hissed. "That woman's trying to ruin you. Do you know her?" Ethan asked. There was a pause too long. "She's nothing to you. She was a mistake." But that night Ethan couldn't sleep. He found himself searching through old boxes, photos, documents, anything. And then, buried beneath legal papers, a birth certificate, his mother, Ruth Ann Grant. The air left his lungs. His hands shook as he whispered, "She's alive." He couldn't think straight. He told his driver to take him to the shelter where she was reportedly staying. When he arrived, the volunteer frowned. "She left this morning," they said. Said she was tired of being a story people talk about but never listen to. Ethan sat in his car, staring at the rain streaking down the window, his reflection blurring with the city lights. For the first time in his life, he felt small, powerless. The next day, as he exited his office, he saw her again. Ruth was standing across the street, thin, frail, but steady. Their eyes met. For a second, everything around them disappeared. He stepped forward. "Mom?" Her lips trembled. "You remember me?" His voice caught. "I didn't know." She smiled, a sad, weary curve. "You didn't want to know. You grew up believing what they told you, that I didn't belong, that I was too dark for their world." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "Please, let me explain." But before he could reach her, a security guard grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, you can't be here. Don't touch her!" Ethan shouted. But the cameras were already flashing, recording every second of his panic. Ruth looked at him, eyes filled not with anger but with heartbreak. "You walked away once, Ethan. Don't do it again." And then she was gone, swallowed by the crowd. He stood there, surrounded by flashing lights and whispered headlines, realizing the truth. The empire he built on power and perfection was crumbling. Not because of a scandal, but because he'd ignored the one person who gave him life. And this time the whole world was watching. The night of the charity awards, the city glowed with flashing lights and red carpets. Inside the grand ballroom, Ethan Grant stood under chandeliers, surrounded by applause. Cameras flashed, smiles everywhere. But inside he felt hollow. Every cheer sounded like an echo of Ruth's voice. "You walked away once, Ethan. Don't do it again." Halfway through his speech, he froze. Through the glass doors at the back of the hall, he saw her, Ruth, standing there in the rain, clutching a torn photograph of a baby boy, him. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she stepped inside, soaked and trembling. Security moved instantly, but Ethan shouted, "Let her through!" The room fell silent. She walked slowly toward the stage, every step echoing against the marble floor. "You remember me now?" she asked, her voice barely holding together. Ethan's throat tightened. "I do, God, I do. I'm sorry." "Sorry," she whispered, tears mixing with rain. "Do you know what it's like to watch your child grow up from the shadows? To hear his name on TV, knowing he's ashamed of your skin?" The audience watched, stunned, phones out, cameras rolling. His father suddenly appeared from the front row, his face red with rage. "This woman has no place here," he shouted. "She abandoned you, Ethan. Don't let her ruin you now." Ruth turned to him, trembling but defiant. "I didn't abandon him, you did. You took him from me because I was black." The words hit like thunder. Gasps filled the room. Ethan looked between them, his mother's pain, his father's fury, and for the first time, he saw the truth. He dropped the award in his hand. It shattered on the floor. "You lied to me," he said, voice breaking. "You stole my mother." His father tried to speak, but Ethan stepped back, eyes wet. "No more lies." He turned to Ruth, reaching out his hand. She hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his. Flashbulbs exploded. Reporters shouted. Ethan looked at the crowd, his voice shaking but clear. "This is my mother." And as the room erupted, some in shock, others in tears, the empire built on silence began to crumble in the brightest light possible. The headlines the next morning didn't just tell a story, they exposed a truth. Billionaire reunites with estranged black mother after decades of lies. Some called it a scandal. Others called it justice. But for Ethan, it wasn't about either. It was about healing something that had been broken long before he was born. In the weeks that followed, Ethan disappeared from the public eye. No galas, no speeches, just quiet visits to a small community center downtown, one Ruth had once volunteered at before life turned cruel. They sat together for hours, talking about everything and nothing, sometimes in tears, sometimes in silence. "Why didn't you fight harder to find me?" he once asked her. Ruth smiled sadly. "Because the world made me believe I didn't belong in your life. But I never stopped praying that one day you'd come looking anyway." And in that moment, he understood what wealth could never buy: dignity, forgiveness, and truth. Months later, Ethan made his first public appearance. No suit, no red carpet, just him and Ruth side by side, standing before reporters. "I built towers to prove I was powerful," he said. "But my mother taught me something power can't teach: how to see people, really see them. We talk about equality, but until we face the systems that make us blind, stories like mine will keep repeating." The room was silent. Ruth placed a hand on his arm, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a man defending his image. He felt like a son who finally came home. The clip spread across the world, sparking conversations about race, privilege, and truth. Some people saw hope, others saw shame, but no one could ignore it, because behind every headline, there's a human story. And this one reminded the world of a painful question we still haven't answered. How many more families have to be torn apart before the color of love stops mattering more than the color of skin?